Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting this evening's program. Shall we please be on our feet as the speakers and the chair take the high table? I humbly ask that we put our mobile phones on silent. Thank you.
The President of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Vice Presidents of the Academy, past presidents, fellows of the Academy, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, students from Presbyterian Secondary, I was going to say Presec, I think that's better, okay. Legon, Accra College of Education, and Accra Wesley Girls College. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana's premier learned society, I welcome you to the second day of this year's Founders Week lectures. The Founders Week lectures is the oldest of the Academy's traditions. It started in November 1960 as the first anniversary celebration and has continued every November since then. Yesterday, we had a presidential address. Today and tomorrow, we would have a two-day symposium on the subjects that will be brought out soon. And the last day will be Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Lecture in memory of Ghana's first president, who also established the Academy. We are privileged this evening to have as the chairperson for this ceremony, the vice president of the Academy. She is Emerita Professor Isabella Quakyi, and she's a member of the Council of the Academy. She's a professor of immunology and parasitology at the University of Ghana, and also a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. She is the first Emerita Professor in the Sciences in the at the University of Ghana. She established the immunology unit at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. And she was the first female director of the University of Ghana School of Public Health and the foundation dean of the school. She is a former UNESCO chair for women in science and technology in the West Africa region. She won the 2014 Laureate African Union Kwame Nkrumah Award for Women in Science. She's the 2019 laureate for the Clara Southmate Ludlow Award by the American Society of Tropical medicine, and hygiene. In 2021, she was recognized as one of the 7 women in science who have changed our world for the better for the better by the Women's World at the Women's World Day in 2021. Shall we, with a clap, please?
Thank you very much, Acting Honorary Secretary, Professor Texon, for your kind words. President of the Academy, Vice President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, students, media, all protocols observed, good evening. My task this evening is a simple one. To introduce the speakers of the day, provide a snapshot of the accomplishments, the topic of the day, and settle down to an evening of scintillating dialogue. Today is day 2 of the Academy's Founders Week celebrations, the start of our 2-day symposia on the theme, International Order in the Changing World, Implications for Rules, Institutions, Norms, Alliances in Ghana, these are broken down into 2 sub-themes. And today's symposium sub-theme is the Changing International Order, Rules, Institutions, and Geopolitics. And under that sub-theme, we have 2 topics. And topic 1 is the crisis of multilateralism, populism, nationalism, and rule-based changing international order. And the speaker for that is Dr. Abdul-Jalilu Ateku, who's a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, University of Ghana. And our second topic is global power contestations and their implications for Africa. Where lie Ghana's interests? What we're going to do is that I will introduce the speaker as they're ready to speak. So the first speaker will be introduced. I'll give their brief profile. They'll speak, and then the second speaker, the second speaker will speak, and then after that, there'll be question and answers. So I'll start with a brief profile of our first speaker. So our first speaker is Dr. Abdul-Jalilu Ateku. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And he's a lecturer of the Department of Political Science in the University of Ghana. Dr. Abdul-Jalilu Ateku holds a BA and an MPhil degrees in political science from the University of Ghana, where he is currently a lecturer in political science. He obtained a PhD in international relations at the School of Politics and International Relations, University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom. His research interests are in international relations theories, international institutions such as ECOWAS, IGAD, SADC, AU, EU, NATO, and the UN, and interested in international security interventions in war-affected post-war states, terrorism and transnational organized crime, peace building, peacekeeping, human security, human rights, elections, security and democracy, and African politics in general. His recent publications include Regional Intervention in the Promotion of Democracy in West Africa, an analysis of the political crisis in Gambia and ECOWAS, coercive diplomacy, and also and insecurity and regional actors' role in securing Africa. An analysis of the role of ECOWAS, SADC, and IGAD in countering terrorism. His work on the nature and role of African intelligence is countering terrorism in the ungoverned spaces in the Sahel. And this will be published under Routledge Intelligence Studies Series by the end of 2023. He has been a guest lecturer on EU and its security policy, EU and African security relations, regional approach in countering terrorism in Africa, and the NATO and Russo-Ukrainian war at the Department of International Relations, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences in the University of Jember, Indonesia, and also the Center of European Studies at the University of Ghana. He has also been a visiting lecturer in security and policing at the Staffordshire University, United Kingdom. So we have a tall order, and we really are for a scintillating evening. So speaker, your audience, your speaker. Thank you.
Good evening, distinguished members fellow of the Academy, students, media, and everyone here present. I'll be speaking on the topic, the crisis of multilateralism, populism, nationalism, and the changing rule-based international order. Indeed, the world is changing, and there are so many factors that are responsible for that. So basically, that is what we are here to listen to. So in the first, my outline of presentation, I'll be looking at or trying to give some understanding of multilateralism and why it is in crisis. So basically, we need to look at, and then also look at the historical context of multilateralism, populism and its threat to multilateralism, impact of populism on international institutions, new thank you. Nationalism and multilateralism, look at the rule-based international order, the changing international order, and how populism and nationalism interact and how they shape the international order. So by the close of the presentation, at the end of it, I'll also be maybe making some recommendations on dealing with some of the threats to multilateralism. All right, so basically, when we talk about multilateralism, what do we mean? Right, about 30 years ago, some two political scientists, Robert Quakyi and John Ruggie, gave some definitions of what multilateralism is. So basically, from Quakyi, he sees multilateralism as the practice of coordinating national policies in groups of 3 or more states, right? For John Ruggie's definition, that one remains opposite to today because he went beyond looking at the relations that exist between states to talk about the rules, the norms, and the values that frame the international system. So these rules and principles that are underpinned by Western and all liberal values for very long time. So multilateralism is considered a pillar of the international order in the post-World War II period. So basically, the international cooperation of states that we see that come together often to address global challenges is underpinned by the concept of multilateralism. So looking at multilateralism is not just about the relations that exist between states, but also include the rules, the norms, and then the values that shape their relationships. So from Ragi's conception, we can speak of multilateralism as going beyond just the cooperation of states. Right. The historical evolution of multilateralism. This can be divided into three phases. So first, we talk about the World War II period. Then we also have the World War I period. We also have the World War II period, and then the post-Cold War period. So multilateralism can be traced to the founding of the League of Nations, which was established after First World War. Actually, once the First World War happened, so there was that idea about what to do so that the Second World War would not happen, right? So, and this was some of the issues that led to the founding of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations was established with principal objective of preventing future wars. But despite its limitations, at least the League of Nations is credited as the foremost international organization which was established as the foundation, or to serve as the foundation for the concept of states cooperating or coming together to promote peace and security. Then also the creation of the Global Security Interlocutor, the United Nations in 1945, right? So, and this also marked an important milestone towards multilateralism, because one, you have the Charter of the UN, which emphasizes collective security, peaceful resolution of disputes, and state cooperation to addressing global challenges. And over the years, we have seen what the United Nations has been doing around the world, particularly trying to mediate in conflicts to bring peace to states globally. And also key developments in the economic aspect of multilateralism include the Bretton Woods Conference, which also gave birth to the IMF and then the World Bank. Then later on also saw the establishment of the World Trade Organization. Right? So basically, multilateralism was deepened in the 1990s following the WTO, its creation in 1995. So through monetary and these trade agreements, these key institutions create that are created to ensure international economic stability and cooperation. So basically, we talk about the IMF today, we talk about the World Bank, we talk about the WTO, and then what they are doing, or the contribution to global governance. So the Cold War era also marked an important shift in global politics, right? We also talk about the challenges to multilateralism as the world was divided into two parts ideologically at the time, right? So basically, that was also key. So the United Nations asserted its critical role of mediating conflicts and also played an important role during the decolonization period. Now, the critical question is, why is multilateralism in crisis? Why is multilateralism in crisis? Right, so basically, the past few years, we have witnessed criticisms, backlashes, and then skepticisms, and some interlocking challenges giving rise to what some refer to as the crisis of multilateralism or multilateralism in crisis. So these crises impede not only the effectiveness of international institutions, but also effective implementation of their agreements, with dire consequences on global governance and ability of states in the international system to address the pressing needs of our time. So today we talk about the wars, we talk about poverty, we talk about global health, climate change, and trade disputes, among others. So largely, these are some of the benefits. Then what are the factors responsible for crisis of multilateralism? One, we talk about the rising of nationalism and populism around the globe, and we'll be discussing this in detail. And we also talk about the power shifts and geopolitical rivalries, especially with the emerging, another emerging power, China, that is also making significant impact in global governance. So populism and its threat to multilateralism. So what is populism? So for us, I mean, looking at the 21st century, populism has emerged as a substantial force across the world. When we talk about populism, we are talking, it's an ideological, or it's a political ideology, which is characterized by appeals to interests of ordinary people, right? And these are normally waged against adopt national rhetoric against the elites, and it has become popular in recent years. So basically, populism is key. Normally, they appeal to the conscience, appeal to the needs of ordinary people, and then they ask for their support. So populist leaders and parties who promote populist agenda often adopt populist rhetoric. So largely, they lay emphasis on the need to rally in defense of national sovereignty. And in doing this, they reject international agreements and institutions. Because once you are asking for people to be inward looking, then it means that you are also telling people to reject, international agreements or their participation in international institutions or organizations like the UN, ECOWAS, and what have you. Right, key factors that pose threat to multilateralism. First, if we look at the parties and then the populist parties, populist leaders, they often prioritize unilateralism over multilateral cooperation. And they lead their state to withdraw from key international agreements. So key decisions, for example, the United States under Donald Trump, for example, withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and Paris Agreement on climate change. So largely, once they are asking states to be inward looking, they go further to ask them to reject some of the decisions of the international organizations, multinationals, and all that. They should be inward looking. And so basically a typical example is what we have seen. We also talk about the emergence of populism being significant because one other key thing is that it undermines trust in international institutions. But populist leaders and parties or movements see these institutions as working against the interests of the ordinary people. So once they are able to get their citizens to accept that they're able to mobilize, then they go further to ask them to reject these institutions and whatever they do. So the consequence of this is the decline in trust, is that it undermines the effectiveness and the legitimacy of international organizations. So for example, the UN, EU, AU, and ECOWAS. So when nations are less willing to cooperate at the international on international issues, then diplomatic efforts and channels are often blocked. So it becomes very difficult. Then let's look at some country-specific manifestations of populism. We talk about the anti-American rhetoric, which we have just, or anti-immigration rhetoric. For example, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, and his, Fidesz party, they are synonymous, or they have become synonymous with right-wing populism in Europe. So if you look at the policies, they are anti-immigrant policies, and some of the decisions that they have taken erode democratic institutions. And also, the government's friendly policies have also unfriendly policies towards the media and also judicial independence, or judicial independence. That's some of the demerits or some of the negative implications of some of these populist decisions. So if you look at recently, for example, someone who is a key member of the European Union and likely to be the next president of the council is now seriously dining with Vladimir Putin. And this has increased the growing discomfort among European politicians and officials, right, as to how things will turn out if Hungary ascend to the presidency. So owing to some of these, populists, so in some of his speeches, he often prefer to refer to himself as a president of his country rather than looking at it from the broader organizational perspective. So basically, some of the populist leaders take some of this and in Moscow was a tragedy. In some of the presentations he made, he said Moscow was a tragedy, Brussels is a bad contemporary parody. And it appears he was looking at saying certain things about Soviet Union, which within or among his own colleagues, they would not be happy about. So basically, these are some of the things. So even though, so you look at Viktor Orban, for example, being nationalistic, at the same time, he's a member of the European Union. So some of the decisions, some of the policies are anti-European Union policies and all that. So it's one of the difficulties that international organizations face with some of these populist and maybe nationalist leaders. Right, Donald Trump's presidency also typifies populism influence on the United States politics. When he also came, he also adopted what we call the American First approach and focused on restrictive immigration policies, also implemented anti-globalization rhetoric, economic protectionism, and all this resonated with a vast majority of American citizens, and especially the illiterates. So his administration strained international relations in many areas. A typical example is the NATO commitment, climate change, and trade, right? So once he also preached became nationalistic, trying to ask that people should look within, or what he termed, or people term as the American First approach, then it means that you are moving the nation state from the international organizations like the NATO that they belong to. So another key populist is the Podemos, right? And this is a leftist alliance. They are currently in a leftist alliance with one of the political parties that contested the recent elections. And it's a democratic socialist and a left-wing populist party, right? And they also hold anti-austerity, anti-corruption, and anti-establishment views in Spain, right? So basically, these are some of the this. So although Podemos could not win national elections to form a government in Spain, but they have made significant influence, right? Very substantial impact on Spanish policy because they have been able to challenge the traditional dominance of the two big tent parties in Spain. Right, so these case studies also illustrate how populism is negatively impacting on global governance. Now, let's specifically look at how do these impact the international institutions and then the agreements. Largely, scholars agree that populism, as we see it today, has a preponderant influence on international agreements, right? And their effective functioning. So the first factor is the erosion of trust international agreements. So populist leaders often are skeptical about the contribution of international agreements, and then they often conclude that are often concluded by the international institutions. They see them as detrimental to the national sovereignty and are not in the interest of the ordinary people. And therefore, we always ask that they should withdraw from such agreement. It is important to stress that such populist stance can lead to the erosion of trust and all that. And a typical example, not only Donald Trump, if we even look at the United States, for example, when the ICC was established in 1998, the Rome Treaty, the United States participated in the negotiations of the Rome Statute and all that. But when it came to the point where states were required to sign onto the agreement, the United States, 7 states withdrew. United States was among, including countries such as Yemen, Qatar, Israel, and some other countries. They didn't actually sign. Then in 2000, Bill Clinton also came in, and then he moved it further. But he did not send the agreement to Senate for ratification. And for Bush, when Bush came for him, he just decided to maybe unsign the agreement and even send a note to the United Nations Secretary General that they should consider the United States out of whatever engagement they have done previously. They should consider that as null and void. And key thing is that United States is, used to be a chief defender of multilateralism. But for so many reasons, they are now like any other state that are also withdrawing from such international or multilateral institutions. So also populism leads to disruption of multilateral cooperation. Right? Populist leaders lay emphasis on national interests, as we have said. They prioritize unilateral and adopt confrontational approaches, negotiations in multilateral settings, and some of these become very challenging. And the result is that progress in signing or implementing critical international agreements becomes very difficult, such as disarmament pacts, trade deals, and all that. And these weaken the spirit to address global challenges. So it becomes very difficult. And then we also have the disruption of liberal norms. So the influence of populism on international institutions has also some deleterious implications for the international order. So basically, not only on global governance, owing to the fragmented and competing international environment, but they can also disrupt liberal norms. So basically, multilateralism based on some, liberal norms, as we have discussed. And therefore, so it means that once, these decisions are taken and they undermine those institutions, so it becomes, the norms and the values become questionable, right? So basically, it undermines the rule-based international order. Right, so then how do you balance the forces looking at the contemporary situation? In contemporary global governance, nationalism and multilateralism are two powerful contrasting forces. So just as the populism that we have seen, but while multilateralism is based on international cooperation, as we have seen, but nationalism is driven by a strong bond to a nation's identity, culture, and sovereignty. So nationalists emphasis on the significance of state sovereignty and national identity. Right, so national leaders prioritize unilateralism, just as we have seen in the case of the populists. So mostly you find populist leaders also as nationalistic, right, trying to prioritize internal matters, the sovereignty of states, rather than the cooperation that we see among multilateral institutions or the international organizations. And typical example is also the Brexit in the United Kingdom, for example, right? And also the withdrawal of the Trump administration in the Paris Agreement. So these are clear manifestations of how nationalist thinking can also undermine the multilateral institutions or international organizations that they are members. So once you exit, like in the case of the United Kingdom, then before then, there have been mobilizations supporting the Brexit. So it's been supporting the Brexit against the entire European organization and all that. And subsequently, during the vote, those who were the Brexiteers won the day. So it means that they are no longer part. And others would also look at some of these things and then may also follow suit. The recent inward looking of states happened during the pandemic. Right? So COVID-19, when it happened, because once we're talking about multilateral cooperation and all that, we expect that maybe international organizations should be the key actors in managing the pandemic. But nation states, not international organizations, were the key players in managing the crisis, right? When the pandemic first arrived. So member states closed their borders and halted exports. So basically, no one wanted any person to move from one country to another. They closed their borders. So the UN passed a resolution in July 2020. So just imagine when the pandemic started in Ghana here, I think March 31st or so, we locked down. So it was until July 2020 when the United Nations passed a resolution on the pandemic. And if you look at even the vaccines, so nation states prioritize their citizens. So the issues of multilateral cooperation, international organizations and what they stand for, no longer the issue. States were looking inside, trying to protect their own citizens. Even in Ghana, we saw it the first time when it happened. They said, oh, it was our president who traveled outside, that there were some other ambassadors and what have you. So accusations here and there. So people were interested in about what happens in Ghana. But so it means that we have forgotten about the fact that we belong to some multinational cooperation and all that. So these are some of this is so state become inward looking, and we cannot just mention about maybe some other states, and these are some of the examples in Ghana. Look at the recent intervention that ECOWAS decided that maybe in Niger, they were, planning to see how they were able to intervene, because in the, from their protocols, whether that is supplementary protocol on good governance and democracy and others, say that no, it's a clear violation and we have the mandate to do what we want to do. And yet people were asking questions about whether, Ghanaian soldiers should be committed, whether the Nigerian soldiers should be committed and all that. So these are all manifestations of nationalism just around us and in other places that we have seen. Then we talk about the rule-based international order. Yes, this concept has some deep historical antecedent. You can go back in antiquity, look at the Hammurabi Code and all that, because this, if you look at the rule-based international order, it's undergirded by some adherence to established norms, rules, and institutions in global governance. So multilateral cooperation that we see, they are all shaped by or established and shaped by rules, norms, and institutions. So throughout history, different times and events have caused the development of this rule-based international order. But this can be traced, as we have seen. So, and then the earliest known code is what we have talked about. We can also talk about the Treaty of Westphalian, or what we call the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And in fact, this also marked the end of the 30 years of war, and also when the modern state system was established. So basically, it's the foundation of the modern international relations. So state sovereignty and the recognition of the authority of individual states to govern their internal affairs without any external control or influence. So basically, then we also talk about, the last century, we also witnessed the surge in multilateral institutions, as we have discussed. So all these are part of the historical journey of the international rule-based system. Right, so, and what are the factors for this change? What factors are responsible for this change? Firstly, we talk about this change is influenced by non-state actors, including non-governmental organizations. We have multilateral corporations, the transnational networks, and all that. And all these, especially multinationals and the MNCs and then the NGOs, especially those that are of international origin and operating in states, they exert preponderant influence on global governance, because most of them, have become very powerful and influential actors. They command a lot of resources. They are very rich. And if you take Apple and Amazon, for example, their wealth surpass the GDPs of many states. So they are very influential, right? So, and they are also making contributions, and that is also, part of the, or contribute to the change that we are seeing in the international system. We can also talk about the other non-state actors like the Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, right? They operate transnationally. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they are in other countries, in war countries, in Côte d'Ivoire. I do remember I was there and then visited some of the this international Human Rights Watch, for example, and Amnesty International. And they all work in tandem with governments and also multilateral institutions to address human rights abuse, humanitarian catastrophe, and global challenges. So basically, they also exert influence on global governance. We also talk about technological advancements, right? So basically now, the power of the technology and how it's influencing international system. There is proliferation of the internet, the social media, transnational networks. All these have accentuated the reach of non-state actors. So social media, for example, has become a force in some case, sometimes disruptive force because of its power of disseminating information that can mobilize public opinion on global scale. And there's also the fake news. So just as we are seeing the good thing aspect of it, with the internet or social media can easily also get fake news circulated. Right, so another key player that is also responsible for the changing world order is China, that is merging, or that has emerged as a global actor. So as a result of China, now in terms of China, it's not only about the economic aspect, right? Today, we are also talking about even the military capacity. So China is working on all fronts, and that also threatens the existing major powers that we have. Talk about the United States, for example. So basically, I'm sure if you have interactions with American foreign officials and all that about China, they will tell you China is a threat, right? And one of the officials, when they asked, said the problem is China. Everything is China. When the pandemic happened, look at Donald Trump's response. He even called it the Chinese virus and all that. So certainly, you look at some of these, they are all manifestations. So China is also a key, actor in making this change or contributing to the change that we are witnessing. So China is now able to, they are looking at the Belt and Road Initiative that they have started since 2013, and it's connecting Asia, Europe, Africa, and so it's going to expand infrastructure and all that. So certainly, other actors coming on board has also affected or contribute to the change that we are currently witnessing. Right, so, but despite the challenges that we have seen, right, multilateralism is still relevant to global governance. And if we look at the 73rd session of the General Assembly, the President, Her Excellency, Mrs. GAAS underscored the importance of multilateralism, and this is what she said, that as President of the General Assembly, I serve as the de facto guardian of multilateralism. An important element of this role is to emphasize that multilateralism does not represent in any sense a threat to the sovereignty of states. On the contrary, multilateralism gives every sovereign state the opportunity and means to resolve complex challenges. So basically, it means that multilateralism is still relevant. And I also believe that it is still relevant. And if it is relevant, then it means that something must be done to address some of the threats that we are seeing. Proposed solutions, maybe I'll only give 2 of them, because the point is, how do we address it? So basically, I talk about the populist leaders and government need to be engaged diplomatically about the dangers of moving away from multilateral institutions and agreements. Because the issue is that if we agree that multilateralism should, it should go. The question we should be asking is, looking at the role that the United Nations is playing, especially the United Nations Security Council, for example, in terms of peace and security, let's look at ECOWAS peace and security architecture and what they have been doing. African Union and other regional organizations, the WTO and all that, what will happen to the work that they are doing, right? So basically, I think that multilateralism is still important, and it is important that leaders, there's the need for strategy to engage leaders that are moving away, asking their state to look inward. The other aspect has to do with the fact that people have lost trust in these institutions, right? Some of these institutions, I talk about the fact that America was one of the chief defender and today has become a critic. Why, right? And why there are people who are also asking questions, because sometimes some of these multilateral institutions or international organizations are not able to assert their authority on some of the protocols, the agreements that they have. So people question. So some of the states are able to flout some of these agreements, policies with impunity, without any sanctions. So they go away with it. Look at the International Criminal Court, for example. America decided that no, it will not be part of it. So if in the event that maybe a crime is committed by an American soldier somewhere, then it becomes a problem. Maybe either it will be dealt with at the bilateral level, or unless it occurs in ICC member country where the person can be punished, right? But the fact is that because they are not able to, institutions like ICC and all that, because of some of these challenges, now even some of the African states have also decided that they will pull away from the ICC, for example. So this is where we are moving on. So it means that some of these problems, those factors responsible for the mistrust, right, should be addressed in order to make multilateral institutions effective, so that their agreements can also be implemented and effectively. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let's give Dr. Abdul-Jalilu Ateku another round of applause. Thank you very much. Multilateralism, I'm beginning to understand how important it is. Thank you very much. We go right into the second topic. That's global power contestations and their implications for Africa. Where lie Ghana's interests? And our speaker on this subject is Ambassador Daniel K. Osei, President, Council on Foreign Relations, Ghana. And a brief profile. If I were to say everything about him, I think we'll spend the whole night here. So Ambassador Daniel K. Osei is the inaugural president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Ghana. Prior to that, he was a diplomat in residence at the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, LESIAD, University of Ghana. A diplomat for over 40 years, He was also the secretary to the President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency John Ateku, from 2000 to 2008. Now, I know how very powerful you were at that time. Now, in that capacity, he was a member of the cabinet, the economic management team, and the diplomatic advisory, and on the diplomatic advisory council. Ambassador Osei has also worked with 2 other Ghanaian leaders around 5 continents on diplomatic engagements and has been involved in a number of conflict management crises in West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. He started his career working with the first generation of Ghanaian Foreign Service officers from Kwame Nkrumah's time. He served in Paris, 1984 to 1988, Conakry, 1992 to 1996, Kinshasa, 1997 to 1998, and Copenhagen, 1998 to 2001. Ambassador Osei has extensive experience in conflict management in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Gambia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo, among others. He has received several awards, including the Commander of the Order of Moyo by the government of Togo, the Order of the Volta Companion Division by the government of Ghana, and the Order of Gravenhage by Her Royal Highness, the Queen of the Netherlands. Ambassador Osei attended in his day the elite Ashimoto School, I like that, in Accra, and proceeded to the University of Ghana, where he received a bachelor's degree. He did his postgraduate studies in international relations at the Institut International d'Administration Publique, that's my French coming up here, and obtained the Diplôme d'études supérieures spécialisées from Sorbonne. Now, audience, this is a speaker, speaker, your audience. Thank you.
Sorry. Madam Chairperson, President and fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I was just taking a look at the brochure as I walked in, and I looked at the speakers and the chairpersons, and I started asking myself, what am I doing here? Because it's either professor or doctor, and it was people from academia. And then I remember that I had said yes because nobody says no to Professor Mensah-Bonsu. And I also noticed when I entered the room that the plot was really started by one of our former vice chancellors, who lured me to come into lecture at Legon. And so this is how I'm pretending that I'm part of academia, but I really cannot pretend that I am. So you will bear with us since we will try and make this as practical as possible. I'm very grateful to the council and to the fellows of the academy for inviting me to speak at this year's Founders Week on global power contestations and their implications for Africa, where lies Ghana's interest. I accepted to speak on this subject because I believe that this is topical. And as my friend just said, the world is changing. And the geopolitics is also changing. But because it is complex, I'll draw a few parameters as an outline, just to guide us on this short journey. I'll start with a commentary on the immutable role of geopolitics in international order and the historical attraction of global powers to Africa, which has been made more imperative in recent times due to the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war, due to the COVID-19 crisis, and I referred to it, and also recently due to what's happening in Gaza. I'll examine the seeming movement of global politics from a bipolar, unipolar position to a multipolar order, where multiple countries are becoming significant in global politics. I will then assess the implications of a multipolar global order for Africa and the resulting challenges and opportunities available therein. Finally, I'll come back to Ghana, share my thoughts on where our interests should be in these global power contestations. Since the transatlantic war, global power politics has echoed in any discussion in international relations, both at the theoretical level and from practical perspective, where countries interact with each other. This comes in different settings and forms. It is without doubt the global competition for spheres of influence, technological supremacy, and raw materials. And this competition seems to be heating up. Within the Committee of States, economic and military powers are increasingly relying on their interactions with other states to shape the global order. Therefore, in watching the flow of events from the 20th century, which was characterized by an unabashed victory of economic and political liberalism over socialism and absolutism. And this is where our friend Fukuyama in 1989 made these predictions. Later marked by the emergence of a multipolar world. The critical inquiry herein is to unravel the implications of the paradigm shift in the global order and how this relates to Africa and Ghana. Indeed, African states have long featured prominently in the foreign policy calculus of great powers and sometimes even middle powers. Nevertheless, given their relatively limited hard power capabilities, none of us in Africa can individually confront or hinder the global aspirations of major powers like the USA, China, Russia, and the UK, and France. Flowing from this truism is Africa's inability to influence the international agenda, even within bodies like the UN, where they are in the majority. In recent times, Africa and its 54 sovereign states have become the point of attraction for great powers. Singh, for instance, notes that Africa's growing strategic value to global powers has been reinforced by international tensions and economic volatility spurred by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the COVID-19 fallout. What does the emerging multipolarity mean for us in Africa? Are we going to fall victim to a new scramble over raw materials and political hegemony? Or will this new multipolarity offer the continent greater room for negotiation and maneuvering, which will eventually lead to a stronger democracy, enhanced growth, and increased possibilities to address our own problems? Considering the current global power dynamics, how will the shift towards multipolarity impact the continent? Will it adapt to whoever emerges as a dominant player? Or does the presence of new influential actors over Africa offer us the chance to assert our own interests, especially in relation to its former colonizers? What are the intentions of major powers like China, US, Russia, and players from Europe? Are they inclined towards a strategy of divide and conquer? Or will they be more inclined towards fostering equal partnerships? Similarly, What role does Africa envision for itself? Completing its own assignments, taking on a role as a vigilant observer, or actively participating in shaping its own landscape? Underlying all these questions is the assumption that Africa is capable of uniformizing its vision of its position in this emerging multipolar order. Sadly, history has taught us and continues to teach us that individual country agendas often dominate Africa's global politics, making it necessary to also look at Ghana's own interest in this. Ghana's own interest in this emerging global order. How did we move from a bipolar system to a multipolar world? The world has seen the rise of bipolarity stemming from the contestation between the US and the then Soviet Union. The implication of a bipolar world to countries the world over, particularly to us in Africa, is that we're forced to either choose to join the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc based on ideological beliefs or interests. And against this background, African states were split over this global storm, and governments were only able to take sides if they joined one side or other. It is true, many of us were members of the non-aligned movement, but it's also pertinent to emphasize that African states that were members of the NAM also tended to be inclined towards the East or the West, and Ghana was a typical example. During the period of the early 60s and 70s, African economies experienced significant growth, accompanied by notable advancements in education, healthcare, and access to clean water. While weak African governments sought to solidify their nation states, there was also a rising trend of authoritarianism, driven by the desire to engage with the world on their terms. Nonetheless, this level of bipolarity was very short-lived after following the collapse of the Soviet Union, which gave the US unparalleled military and ideological superiority. Again, I refer to Fukuyama, The End of History, 1989. In his book, Fukuyama described this development as not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. In an earlier paper I presented at the University of Ghana about a year ago, I argued then that in Fukuyama's prediction of the fact that liberal democracy had triumphed over communism, and that would probably be the dominant ideology going forward, he did not factor in globalization. Then artificial intelligence was not that prominent in the world. He also did not factor in ICT and even the changing nature of work. I argue in that paper that given all those drastic changes in the world since 1989, perhaps the prediction that liberal democracy was going to triumph over communism was short-lived, and that there was a considerable amount of backsliding of democracy in many countries all over the world. For instance, I mean, even in Ghana, in the past, all you needed to do was to win an election. And if there was not TikTok or WhatsApp or internet, then you wait for the next election. But the world has changed so radically that citizens are dissatisfied and they're asking themselves, what is all this liberal democracy thing about? And all this has affected the geopolitics. Be that as it may, the unipolar for us meant the US ascent as the world's lone superpower. Again, this transition in power play had a rippling effect on African states. In the early 1980s, the United States and its Western allies began exerting pressure on African states through the IMF and the World Bank. It started imposing economic conditionalities as a prerequisite for further financial support to these nations. These conditionalities were rooted in neoliberal reforms, which emphasized reducing state intervention and creating more room for the private sector to operate. The initial phase of these reforms centered on the concept of getting the prices right. That is a description by the World Bank as a general solution for achieving economic growth. However, when the anticipated results failed to materialize, as Zaga argues in his book, the focus shifted towards establishing a broader enabling environment for development in Africa, giving prominence to the institutional aspects. I think one of the assumptions that that sought to increase opening up political space as a precondition for further aid was that if you opened up your political space and there was more discussion, and if you open up your economy and allowed private sector intervention, your countries will become more attractive for foreign direct investment. Unfortunately, from 81 to all the way to 94, all the countries which undertook structural reform programs or economic reform programs funded by the IMF and the World Bank did not see significant increases in the foreign direct investments. So concurrently, African states also made efforts to devise their responses to the oil crisis in 1973. This transformation was once again being driven by external forces, primarily the US and its allies, seeking to legitimize the emerging unipolar world order by emphasizing these values. Consequently, the 1990s witnessed Western influences imposing both political reforms, such as the Western-style multi-party systems, and market-oriented economic reforms on Africa. Remarkably, these reform processes spread all over Africa. You remember that there was a conference, national conference in Benin, which became like a virus. And in many Francophone countries, then started questioning whether there should not be multi-party elections in their countries. This same thing happened in Ghana. Even in Togo, I remember in the early 90s, for the first time, the government decided to experiment with multi-party elections and even appointed a prime minister called Kofi Kofigo. But in less than 6 months, Kofi Kofigo's office was attacked by soldiers. And since then, there has never really been a genuine multi-party election in Togo. Remarkably, these reform processes spread across Africa, whereas more authoritarian Asian nations, despite experiencing high economic growth rates since the 80s, did not encounter similar external demands for reform. Interestingly, some Asian countries that have embraced economic liberalization faced a severe financial crisis starting in 1997. In contrast, countries that have pursued more protectionist economic strategies, such as China, India, Vietnam, and Malaysia, were less affected and sustained their economic growth almost uninterrupted. Suffice it to say that the unipolar era saw Africa being taken as an object of global politics that only waited to be tutored by the global West. This is an argument that Simura and FIDA made earlier this year. Recent developments in global power politics do not depict the end of history as posited by Fukuyama, and as I argued earlier. The ascent of China on the economic front, the growth of India's economy, and Russia's resurgence with its neighbors give credence to the re-emergence of a multipolar world order. Scholars and policymakers alike have now agreed that the global order has entered a multipolar world characterized by the economic and political rise of China, which has become more assertive, openly challenging the dominance of the US and the resurgence of Russia. In the wake of this global power contestation, the implications on Africa could be either dire or rewarding. What is our place, Africa's place in a multipolar world? What are the challenges and what are some of the opportunities? Since the advent of BRICS, there has been a growing chorus of voices questioning long-held hegemonic powers. The recent unprovoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the attendant conspicuous behavior of states in the UN Security Council and other forums indicate an impending shift in the global balance of power. Indeed, these developments have ushered in a new global order and most importantly, altered the positioning of Africa in global relations. In recent times, Africa has gained more visibility and interest from great powers. In 2000, the Forum on China and Africa Cooperation was founded and has since evolved into a multilateral platform for fostering collaboration between Africa and China across various aspects of development. Importantly, it operates without the Western-driven unipolar world democracy and human rights conditionalities. During the same year, in 2000, the Africa-EU partnership was established. Subsequently, in 2008, the India-Africa Forum Summit was also inaugurated. Russia then entered the race by launching the Russia-Africa Summit in 2019 with the primary goal of rekindling and strengthening its ties with Africa. In fact, I recently saw also that Saudi Arabia had joined the race and organized the Saudi Arabia Africa Forum. And I've been thinking about the pictures you see during these summits. You see many African heads of state attending a summit with one head of state. They have 2 minutes of a photo option. At best, they might have a 2-minute platform to address the world. And it doesn't look like a good picture at all. So, because what can you as a continent say in 48 hours for all your countries talking to one other head of state? And I find a recent suggestion by the new president of Kenya very interesting. His argument was that instead of us all lining up to go and visit another head of state, why don't we ask the current chairman of the AU, the most recent president of the the recent chairman of the AU, and the incoming chairman of the AU, and maybe the president of the AU Commission, accompanied by the heads of the regional economic groups like SADC, like ECOWAS, then it will look a neater platform. And there will be some uniformity. Because, for a very long time, everybody has seen us as a continent where there's conflict, there's starvation, and political now coup d'etats. And if you also then queue up 48, 50 of yours for 2 days, begging for the same sources, it doesn't give us a very good picture. Despite being afflicted by the 3 C's I referred to earlier, conflict, corruption, and coups, there seems to be a modest attempt to bridge the gap through another C, connectivity, both physical and economic, coupled with the overarching objective to be self-reliant and to follow in its own independent foreign policy choices in order to secure our rightful place in global politics. The ratification and execution of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement bodes well for providing the necessary bargaining power in the quest to harness the continent's synergies. After 6 decades, it is not unrealistic to envision the African Union taking the lead in advocating for the adoption of a unified African currency for intercontinental trade. While discussions on de-dollarization have often revolved around replacing the US dollar with currencies like the Chinese yuan, the proposed BRICS currency, or even the use of robust regional currencies, such as the Indian rupee. Such actions, in my view, would merely perpetuate Africa's economic and financial dependence on other global powers. It is evident that Africa can best navigate this situation by not aligning with any global rivals, but by asserting its independence and giving life to what Kwame Nkrumah said, that we face neither east nor west, we face forward. Again, the emergence of a multipolar world is a clarion call for Africa to create a formidable front. African leaders must consider delegating some of their domestic sovereign powers in areas such as foreign policy, security, and monetary policy to the Continental Union. Now, how can this be done? And I'm sure that a number of my colleague diplomats would disagree with me. Why don't we set up a foreign policy desk at the AU? And why don't we then make the Peace and Security Council also take responsibility for foreign policy determination as a collective platform? And instead of maybe handing over the place of Africa on the Security Council as a permanent member, as we've been arguing, to one country, we can then offer that those 1 or 2 places to the AU, represented by whoever will have responsibility for foreign policy. This will not be easy to achieve, but can you ever imagine that the seat that we're asking for at the Security Council as a permanent member is given to a country like Algeria? There'll be trouble. The Moroccans will go haywire. If you give it to South Africa, the Nigerians will not agree. But if you have an AU desk on which we agree some form of uniformity, at least to bring about a bit of clarity and uniformity. The BRICS group, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, can explore the concept also of a BRIC currency. Rather than us waiting to join BRICS or rupee or yen, why don't we set up an African currency? A continental currency will significantly exonerate African countries that have hitherto been subjected to Western dominated financial hybrid warfare since the end of colonialism, and Zimbabwe is a typical example. In the current era, the world is seeking new and diverse paths for economic growth, and Africa, with a billion-strong population, and our thriving youth and growing middle class, holds tremendous potential. What Africa requires most to propel itself forward is a political agenda driven by awakened leadership to prioritize economic progress. External actors can either support or impede this process, but they cannot quell the aspirations and the pragmatic engagement of African nations. Consequently, in a multipolar world, Africa enjoys an expanded array of options thanks to the presence of multiple stakeholders and diverse avenues to achieve its goals. This enhanced flexibility has the potential to make Africa more self-reliant and less dependent on external influences. The formulation of a unified continental foreign policy holds the potential to bolster Africa's standing, both within the continent and on the global stage. I referred to the permanent seat of the UN, and we can consider that as a proposal. This contest, seeking to secure at least two seats, has led various African nations, particularly Nigeria and South Africa, to vie for these positions. And I explained what I think could create even further confusion if we insist on any country in Africa being given the seat. Throughout history, it has become evident that the veto power is primarily wielded to safeguard the interests of the holder rather than the broader regional concerns. Given the current landscape of fragmented security and foreign policies across Africa, it would be unrealistic to assume that any nation granted such power would consistently act in the best interests of the continent. A case in point is the 2011 Libya crisis and the UN Security Council Resolution 1973. When the Libyan uprising, initially part of the Arab Spring, escalated into a full-fledged civil war, the AU proposed a dialogue-based peaceful resolution to the conflict. Individual African states held conflicting views that undermined the AU's own peace initiatives, despite being in line with various protocols and principles of African solutions to African problems. I recall that President Wad, who was a very good friend of Gaddafi until the Libyan crisis, flying into Libya on his own when there was an AU committee of heads of states which had already arrived in Libya to go and negotiate a position. Wad then gave press conferences to the world media in which he was condemning Libya and asking the Western states to intervene against the AU's official position and against the position taken by the AU delegation, which was already in Libya. In fact, according to Museveni, before they could fly into Tripoli, they were ordered by NATO commanders not to dare to stay in Libya. This is how very little our influence can get us to. I've already referred to the appointment of foreign policy chief or the formation of a foreign policy committee. I realize that I'm running out of time, so I will try and hurry through. Ghana's multifaceted interest in the new global order. Undoubtedly, the global order has undergone a significant transformation. In the Western Hemisphere, South American governments have shifted away from US influence and China's ascent to global prominence is increasingly evident. What's most noteworthy is the transition from Euro-Atlantic dominance to a multipolar world order that values self-determination and sovereignty, heralding the emergence of a new world order. Examining the historical patterns, one can observe how global phenomena, such as this shift. One of the fascinating trends in contemporary international relations is the move towards regionalism and regional integration. There's a shared consensus today that a well-functioning international system relies on a strong sense of integrity and is most effective when supported by a robust community structure. It's an argument that Emerita makes in one of his presentations. I wish to refer to Ghana's own role in attempting to bring about a bit of unity. You remember the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union. You remember the role that Nkrumah played in the liberation of the number of states in Southern Africa. You remember even in the OU conference in 1963, we attempted to establish a certain nucleus for possible unity in future. And this is an argument that Fuya Yakovini makes in one of her publications. Integration, both in theory and practice, can encompass political and economic dimensions. Given the current global political landscape, marked by the emergence of new global powers, the economic repercussions of COVID-19, and ongoing conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict, it is now incumbent on Ghana to prioritize economic integration. Regionalism and economic integration hold the potential to create a larger regional market, fostering economies of scale, specialization, learning by doing, and attracting foreign direct investment. An expanded regional market is closely linked to enhanced economic growth. Efforts to tailor effective economic integration are key to promoting cooperation, establishing a common market, and facilitating domestic reforms. Ghana's active pursuit of hosting the Secretariat of ACTA demonstrates our commitment to stimulating economic integration. The Washington Post reports that by 2030, Africa could become a 2.5 trillion market for business-to-business consumption. ACTA is expected to result in a unified market of over 1.2 billion people, with a combined gross product exceeding $3 trillion. The resulting consequence is that Ghana, in its role as a secretariat, stands to gain significantly from a diverse range of goods and services, access to a vast market, reduced market volatility, and a substantial increase in job opportunities. In the wake of external shocks caused by the 2007 financial crisis, which has escalated into a fully fledged global economic crisis, due to the intricacies of the financial system in the US and the heavy dependence of countries like Ghana on it, the emergence of global powers offers an opportunity for Ghana to explore. Economic integration and regionalism can play a crucial role in helping withstand and offset some of these shocks. It is true that we've secured over 50 signatories to the AFTA. It is true that this could bring about a form of economic integration, but this is an ongoing process. And there are many, many impediments which are imposed on, which we have imposed on ourselves. Recently, when Ghana signed the non-visa agreement for ordinary passport holders in between our two countries, there was a row in the Nigerian Senate the senators were asking Tinubu, why is it that Ghanaians can enter South Africa without the visa, but Nigerians cannot enter South Africa without a visa? This is how unsmooth the process is. Some scholars contend that integration should adopt a production-oriented approach. It's an argument that before his death, Professor S.K.B. Asante, my next door neighbor at Legon, used to make often. In contrast, others argue that in contemporary international politics, integration is primarily driven by trade, and thus African states should embrace the market-oriented approach, where trade and production are functions of the market. The above notwithstanding, and based on the obligation that rests on Ghana as the Secretariat of ACTA, playing a leading role in the pursuit of regionalism and economic integration, this paper concurs with the findings of Ntwidanso for the attainment of a fully fledged integration, a regional bloc which must undergo several stages. And he argues that the first stage is a free trade area. Which should eventually lead to the establishment of a customs union. He argues that the second stage involves a customs union, where all trade barriers among member states are removed and a common set of external barriers is adopted. He suggests that the third stage constitutes a common market where member countries permit unrestricted movement of factors such as labor and capital among themselves. The fourth stage, he argues, represents a full economic union where member states unify all their economic policies encompassing monetary, fiscal, and welfare policies. From the above, Ghana's interest in economic integration must therefore be seriously pursued to enable the state reap the benefits that come with multipolarity. Ghana's interest is at a crossroads with a changing face of global politics, and thus its interest must be safeguarded to all intents and purposes. One such global phenomenon is climate change and its effect on global South countries. Before 2021, climate change was primarily seen as an issue that disproportionately impacted the global South, with Ghana being no exception. Climate change has continued to pose a significant threat, disrupting the lives and livelihoods of many Ghanaians, including those residing in the more volatile arid northern regions, as well as the coastal areas, as we've seen recently in the spillage of climate change. In this era of multipolarity, there's an increased risk that advanced states may engage in free riding, benefiting from the mitigation efforts of others. Consequently, international cooperation is imperative for Ghana to effectively mitigate climate change. That's where I agree with my friend when he talked about the importance of multilateralism. Within the space of climate change, only multilateralism can achieve the results that we all want for ourselves. 2 decades ago, terrorism was perceived as a security problem, mainly predominant in the global West and the Middle East. However, the September 11, 2001 attacks on the US, which were instigated by Al-Qaeda, and the rise of ISIS in the Middle East, redesignated the threat of terrorism as a global problem. For Africa, even though terrorism is not a new phenomenon, the events in Libya, which culminated in the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime in 2011 and left in its wake an unstable state, and also paved the way for the emergence of various armed groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The subsequent efforts to stabilize the situation in Libya have triggered a southward movement of the armed groups alongside a surge in arms proliferation in the Sahel and West African sub-region. Data from the Global Terrorism Index shows a shift in the dynamics of terrorism, with it becoming more concentrated in regions and countries suffering from political instability and conflict, such as the Sahel. Violent conflict remains a primary driver of terrorism, with over 97% of terrorist attacks in 2021 taking place in countries in conflict. All the 10 countries most impacted by terrorism in 2021 were involved in an armed conflict in 2020. Attacks in countries involved in conflict are 6 times deadlier than attacks in peaceful countries. There were serious deteriorations in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, especially the Sahel. 48% or 3,461 of all terrorism deaths globally occurred in sub-Saharan Africa, with 4 of the 10 countries with the largest increases in deaths from terrorism residing in sub-Saharan Africa: Burkina Faso, DRC, Mali, and Niger. To deal with the threat of violent extremism, strategies such as the G5 Sahel and the Accra Initiative were launched in 2017 to respond to the growing insecurity linked to violent extremism and cross-border security challenges in the region. These strategies have been largely ineffective. Even more worrying is the fact that several states of the Sahel and West Africa are sliding into a democratic crisis, given the apparent lack of satisfaction with the nature of governance in these countries. This has led to the emergence of coup d'etat in the region, a situation that provides fertile ground for the spread of violent extremism. And this has also resulted in institutional crisis at the regional and continental levels. Recently, there have been cases where ECOWAS and AU no longer speak with one voice. The Peace and Security Council of the AU votes in a particular way, in spite of what the Authority of Heads of States of ECOWAS would have decided. Geostrategic alliances with countries like Russia and China have become very. I will wish to conclude now. As global power rivalries escalate, it is essential to recognize that the existing international order has seldom been favorable to Africa. It has arguably reinforced the continent's peripheral position in global affairs. Consequently, African countries find themselves naturally inclined to be revisionist forces, advocating for a more inclusive and equitable international system that can effectively address the challenges faced by all states. It is crucial to consider that the new international order, if primarily transactional and lacking a strong normative foundation, and may have negative consequences. Ghana, as noted earlier, is at a crossroads with evolving dynamics in the global political landscape. Its ability to make quick decisions and to capitalize on the burgeoning African trade market will determine whether Ghana will continue to sit on the fence or will either create a credible agenda that sets the country apart from other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I believe we've had a wonderful, wonderful insights into a brilliant lecture. And I think a few questions and answers will, elaborate a number of these points. So can we give Ambassador another round of applause for this brilliant Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was trying not to rush you because there was so much to learn, but we need questions and answers so that for more clarification of several points that you've raised. So I think we're going to have this one round of questions and answers. If it's okay with everyone, say your name, where your institution, and ask your question. And we'll do one round of five questions to start off. So can you start? And there's a hand up there. There's a hand up there.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm Joseph Bauer from University of Ghana, Department of Distance Education and Political Science. And I can see our grandfather here, Professor Ayi. So thank you, presenters, Dr. Jalilu. He taught me, he's my teacher. And today I'll be asking him questions, but not a real question. And thank you, Ambassador. I want to take it from Africa's quest to be independent. And then for the purpose of this lecture, I want to localize in our Ghanaian setting. So Ghana is, I think, 66 years now, and we are still beggars. I think 63 years, and we are begging. If you look at China, the rise of China, like Dr. Jalilu was saying, their citizenship, their nationalism were really enforced by the citizens. They accepted that this is what we want. Now, when we come to Ghana and most African countries, that is where Frantz Fanon, I love this man so much, that psychological aspect of independence. Now, politically fine, but it's psychological, to the extent that even if our leaders are even receiving the Western, those who drink tea all the time, they have to be in their suits. And now, a typical Ghanaian home, when you are to marry, then the family will be asking of Holland, not GTP. So how are we going to be independent when from the leadership to the citizenship, there is this psychological aspect where we are supposed to break? And in Ghana, we are living in a polarized society, NPP, NDC. And for us to be dominant and then make say in the international system, we need national interest. So I've been asking all the time, do we have national interest in Ghana or party interest? And the danger is that we are actually having NDC citizens, NPP citizens. And for me, if we don't come together and then Africanize our democracy, the sense of communalism is just losing. And then it is being shifted. I don't know where it's being shifted to. So how do we come with that a nationalistic mindset where we can all push for a national interest for the betterment of our nation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Try not to give another lecture for the next questions, but that was a very good question. Dr. Ateku, that was over to you. We'll collect five, and then we'll answer. So 4 more. Any others?
Please, my name is Dansu Emmanuel Mensa from Presec Legon. My question is based on the first topic. International NGO, translational network, and other bodies are becoming more influential in terms of relationship that exists among countries due to their wealth. And I'm asking, won't they make the function of the UN difficult and tough in the near future?
We have 3 more. Any others?
Please, I'm Gerard Owusubano from Presec Legal. Please, first speaker, when you were talking, you mentioned of multilateralism, which was mainly established to promote world peace. And we also talk about populism and nationalism, which are threats to multilateralism. And I want to ask, why is it that some nations are encouraging nationalism and more populism, which will not enhance world peace?
Two more. Last 2 questions. Maybe I can ask. Near the schools, surely you must have found this extraordinary lessons in the global power contestations and Africa trade. You haven't been reading of any on that. Well, we'll go with the 3 questions for now, and then maybe we'll have the last 2.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, Bawa, I don't know whether it's a question or a contribution. So basically, the first part is that what can we do? You are talking about the fact that we tend to like things that are foreign to us, right? And what can we do to embrace our own things, right? And I just went back to what one of the popular politicians, the late Dan Latte, said, that we should domestication, we should eat what we produce and produce what we eat. It is still inward looking. It's good. There's nothing wrong that states can be sovereign. They can do things on their own, right? Certainly, you cannot sit idle. If you want to be competitive, then it means that you must produce. So that is very, very important. And that's why it is important to encourage that we try to produce things not only for our local consumption, but also foreign, so that we can earn foreign exchange that can boost the economies that we have. So that is it. I don't know whether if I've answered that. Then there is also the aspect of, I think Danso asked the question. Yeah, UN itself is also a multilateral institution, right? UN is also a multilateral institution, and therefore threat to multilateralism is also a threat to all multilateral institutions, right? Because basically it's expected that states will have to sign the agreements with once they become members of these international organizations. And therefore, once you sign, it's expected that you mainstream them in your domestic policies and all that. But from the lecture, we realize that some states even sign and yet they do not implement, right? And so basically, it's because one key thing is the problems that the international organizations themselves are creating, because citizens all over the world still question, they still believe that multilateral institutions are not delivering public goods. And that's why I said that it is important, and that will tie to the last question, that it is important for some reforms by these multilateral institutions, these international organizations. Why is it that others are leaving? They sign on to be part of various agreements and all that. But why is it that when it gets to certain point where you need all states to agree and mainstream some of these policies in their internal policies, they do not do, right? So it means that those problems will have to be identified and then addressed. So that's why I asked for reforms in multilateralism, multilateral institutions, so that when these problems are identified and then effective strategies are put in place to address them, then it means that the populists and then the nationalists will feel that maybe something is being done, so that it becomes very difficult to convince the world. But take it, some of the problems that we face globally, talk about terrorism, like Ambassador Osei has said, terrorism, the pandemic, climate change, they transcend national boundaries. So individual states cannot take their own initiatives to address it. They will need cooperative efforts to be able to do that. So basically that is it. And then the failure of multilateral institutions and then what they are delivering. So basically that's what I've said. Once these problems are there in these institutions, they have to, those problems will have to be identified and then addressed. And that's why I call for reforms in this international organization, because there are certain things that we can be effective, right, or we can benefit from if we work as a community or as a group, rather than states seeing themselves in, because climate change, it will be very difficult for one state to be able to deal with it. If it is a pandemic, we saw what happened with the COVID-19. So you will still require cooperative efforts to be able to address that. So certainly there are inherent challenges, inherent problems with multilateralism, and this will have to be addressed in order to make multilateralism attractive to even the populists and then the nationalists. Thank you.
Right. We've got two more questions on, if not, I think then you've had what, maybe a second, we'll give you a second chance, one more, and then we'll summarize. Can you give him?
So this one is brief. With regards to the reforms, this is a question. So Dr. Jalilu, do you foresee any chance of China becoming a hegemon? With regards to some of the power plays in the international system, for instance, the IMF, the World Bank, the principle of weighted voting, the one who contributes more is the one whose votes carries much weight. And you know for sure, Africa, what's our contribution? I learned we are even owing most of the dues. So this is just a question. Thank you.
Prof. Kopinji, Ghana Academy. To you, Ambassador. Normally, great powers come about because they have economic power. And you mentioned that Africa should also become a player. How do you address that issue vis-a-vis the weak economic status and manufacturing capacity of the African continent? You raise a very important issue there. And that's exactly the point I was making. That as individual states, our markets are too small. And even in trying to go by the convergence criteria in ECOWAS, we are struggling. But as a unified market, first of all, we can industrialize quicker. We can trade better. and our negotiating position becomes better. So the way we are currently, we cannot compete. That is why I'm recommending regionalism, integration, and eventually a unified market, which can then improve the level of your ability to negotiate and to be a major player. But in our current states, I'm sorry, I don't see any Africa doing very, very well and playing the role that it has.
Thank you very much. I think we've had two excellent. There's one. Yes, please.
I think the second part relates to what Dr. Ambassador Osei. You asked whether do I foresee China becoming a global hegemon? China is already a global power, right? China is already a global power. There's no two ways about that. And China's presence is part of the changing world order that we are witnessing, because economically, China is powerful. So basically, I mean, China's presence has now challenged the existing status quo that we know of or maybe the unipolar world, as he has rightly indicated in the presentation, and it is shaping even transnational networks, including even interstate, like Africa relation with the other world. Like he talked about, look at the BRICS, our relation with French, Russia, and all that. Okay, China is also doing the same thing. Now, look at even the support that, and whether it is the loans and whatever we are getting from China, right? So even African states will look for China for so many things than even looking elsewhere. But previously, that was not the situation. So China's presence is also part of the changing world order that we are talking about. So China is already a global hegemon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't possibly summarize these two brilliant lectures, but I have a take-home message for each one. And for the lecture by Dr. Ateku, my take-home message is that multilateralism is relevant to global governance, and it's not a threat to nation states. So that's my take-home message on that. And my take-home message from Ambassador Osei is that the current global dynamics, we've got to ask, what are the major intents of the major powers? And what role do Africa envisage for itself? And within that, what does Ghana envisage for itself? Unless we can address that, I don't think we're going to get very far in where we are. So we need this to address for the major powers, see them for what they are, identify what we want for ourselves, and Africa work together. And this has been the context of all the discussions, that Africa, we can't go it alone in individuals. We've got to work together to counteract the interests of the major powers. So on this, I think we've had a wonderful evening with stimulating lectures. And we want to thank the two speakers very much.
We would like to thank the chairperson for this session. Shall we give her a clap, please? Thank you very much, Emerita Professor Quakyi. We would want to recognize 4 schools which are here. These are Fisek Legon, Accra College of Education, Accra Girls, is it secondary school, high school, or Accra Girls? I think it's easier for me that way. And then Accra Wesley Girls. Shall we thank you very much for coming? We are very glad that you've consistently been coming, and we hope you are learning and going away with messages that will help all of us. We would want to announce that we would have another session, the second day of the symposium tomorrow, and it will be at 5:30 as usual. The title is Drivers for an Effective and Sustainable Rule-Based International Order. We will start, as I said, at 5:30. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you tomorrow. Shall we please rise for the party to descend?